Welcome back to CyHawk Talk here on a Sunday, doing a Sunday rewind show, looking back at number 14, freshly minted 14, Iowa State's win over Iowa 16-13. Kyle Conradi, 54-yard field goal with just under 2 minutes remaining in the ball game to beat the Hawkeyes in Ames. First win in Jack Trice for the Cyclones over Iowa since 2011, first back-to-back wins in the series since 2011, 2012. And Matt Campbell, first winning streak in the CyHawk series. Ben, initial reaction to kind of a milestone win for Campbell and company.
It was just, you could see it coming. We really felt like that on our show, Ethan. We thought this might be a one-score game. We thought Rocco Becht would have to go down and lead a game-winning drive, and it turned out to be just that, with Kyle Conradi making a 54-yard field goal that just stings a little extra for every Iowa fan watching out there, knowing what happened last year. And man, Conradi is nails. The 63-yarder last year, the two kicks in CyHawk, he might be the ultimate thorn in the Hawkeye side.
Yeah, he etched his name in CyHawk rivalry history last year, and he does it again, and he's got a couple more years left in the Cardinal and Gold. So it might be a guy who Hawkeye fans really come to loathe to see roll out onto the field here year over year. I can't say I'm stunned by the outcome. We don't do predictions. You essentially predicted Iowa State to win. I think I said that I would take Iowa to cover a 3.5 spread when we were talking after we were done recording, and I was correct, but it still kind of went the way I was expecting. It kind of just felt like Iowa State's year, and there's certainly a lot of discourse going around about who is the better program now, and we might be able to get into that a little bit later, talk about what you've already written on that topic this morning. But I think the number one thing that stuck out to me, and I tweeted it right as that final drive was going after the Conradi kick, because you had a minute 54, I believe, was on the clock for the Hawkeyes in that final drive, and I just tweeted out, I said, this drive will define Mark Gronowski's tenure as a Hawkeye. Now, I'm going to walk that back a little bit. I'm going to say, it has the possibility to be a defining moment in his Hawkeye career. I think that, that might have been a little reactionary, a little hot take-ish in the moment to say this is going to define his career right here in week 2. Because if he goes out, beats Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, we might forget about a 16-13 loss in the CyHawk game. But it was certainly a defining moment, and that's always going to be, a mark on him. Even if he goes on and wins, it goes 11-1 in the regular season, takes him to the Big Ten championship game. It's still going to be, he lost to the Cyclones and looked really bad in that final drive. Gets 6 yards on first down, takes a sack, then third down, runs into a sack. In my opinion, he said he after the game he said the defense made a great play, and it's like, yeah, the defenders, cornerbacks might have had your receivers well covered, but you ran straight into the defender for that sack, and then fourth down, buys time, runs around, scrambles around, whips it downfield to Hayden Large, who can't come up with it. Well covered, and that's a turnover on downs, and Becht can go kneel it out twice. And, it just kind of felt like, that's kind of the way it's been so far, is maybe a little promising, but immediately dashed. So I do think that could be a very defining moment. It's like, if this continues to trend downhill, I said in the takeaway that he's trending to be an also ran at quarterback for the Hawkeyes instead of a local legend in Iowa City. We might look at that as, there were hints in the UAlbany game. We probably should have known in the UAlbany game, but we really knew in the CyHawk game that this wasn't going to be a special season. And I just like to reiterate, I'm not an Iowa fan. I did not grow up cheering for the Hawkeyes, so this is not coming from a place of emotion. I am not pissed off that the Iowa Hawkeyes lost the game yesterday. But this was supposed to be a different season. I can relate to Hawkeye fans who are upset right now because this was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be the veteran quarterback. This was supposed to be the offensive coordinator that changed things for you guys. You saw promise last year. You saw promise in the clips and the highlights the Hawkeyes posted on social media. You got all excited, and boy, is it sour in your mouth today.
I would almost venture to think that it did feel like the same old thing. When Mark Gronowski gets the ball with a minute 54 left, I don't know about you, Ethan, but knowing the Hawkeyes only had one timeout, couldn't run the ball like they had been doing really effectively the entire second half, I did not have any confidence that the Iowa Hawkeyes were going to be able to move down the ball and score a field goal or a touchdown to win.
I think that's just kind of a sign of how things have where things have fallen for the Hawkeyes in recent years. Because I think 3 years ago, you look at that and you have the utmost faith in that offense's ability to pull things out, because that's kind of been Iowa's calling card, is the ability to go and pull out these late game close wins. You fall behind late, or it's tied up late and it looks bleak, but then your defense gets a stop and you come up with a huge special teams play and you move the ball just into field goal range, and then your kicker is nails. Instead, they're just watching their chief rival do that exact thing. They've seen them do it twice already this year, to Kansas State and now you. And so it kind of feels like, man, that's what we used to be. What happened? What happened? And I think you've wasted prime defensive performances the last couple of years with bad offensive play, and now the defense isn't capable of making that big stop and setting up the special teams to make a big play and set up the offense, though inefficient, to play the hero late in the game and move the ball just into field goal range for that win.
Now, I think you also have to offer some credit to the Iowa State defense on that last stop. One of the stories that I wrote in the Quad City Times, Ethan, was, can Tamatoa McDonough, the guy who got both of those sacks on the final drive, be Iowa State's answer to the problem that they've had, which is in these situational football situations, not to reuse the word, but they haven't been able to generate the pass rush. And they got three of them against Iowa, two of them coming on that final drive. That's the most perfect situation for a pass rush you can ask for, is to go out there and win a game. And especially on the first one, you're right. I think Granowski did kind of run into that second one, but you got to credit Iowa State for getting to it and closing that game.
Yeah, oddly enough, in the post game, the first one was the one where he said, "Well, I needed to make my read faster," and he did have a little bit of time on the replay. You watch it, and it's like, yeah, he probably could have found an open receiver if an open receiver had presented themselves. And I'm not, Coach Ferentz last week, he didn't say it this week, but last week said the passing game were a whole team effort. Same story, I think, this week. There were plenty. I almost filmed every single offensive snap for the first 3 quarters on the off chance they had an explosive play and I could get a huge clip on Twitter. And you'd run some of those back when Iowa was back on defense, and man, it just seemed like no one was getting open. And Mark would buy time, and you're kind of like, is he just dancing around in the pocket? Just dance around in the pocket. You look at what's downfield for him, and it's like the most open guy has a defender three feet away from him who's going to break on the ball the moment Mark goes back to throw it. So I think Iowa State, their defensive game plan was nails. I think they locked down Iowa's receivers, and I don't think there was a lot of help for Granowski, but he certainly didn't make the winning plays either.
Do you feel like you can make some observations? Is this a good enough data point? We didn't really get any data points in the week 1 win against Albany. What did you feel like you learned about Granowski or the Hawkeyes or the offense in this game?
Well, that's the thing. That's why I had one of my headlines be, take that for data, was that even if this is another sluggish game where they're inefficient and we're just kind of like, well, what the heck was that? Which there was kind of that coming out of it. But there's now 2 what the heck was that's in a row, right? That was the prevailing sentiment coming out of the U Albany game, and now you have it again against the Cyclones, and so you're starting to get an idea of like, hey, maybe this team really isn't going to be elite on offense. And all offseason, I had this kind of like thought in the back of my mind, maybe some football genius that does know ball deep inside me saying, how are they going to replace Caleb Johnson? How are they going to replace Caleb Johnson? Because you've already seen all these running backs that they have sitting at the top of the depth chart, and none of them looked as special as that guy, right? I think Kamari Moulton would have been a huge godsend yesterday if he could have been available for that game. And Jazz Patterson played very well. TJ Washington, Xavier Williams, back to the drawing board with those two. But it's like, who's going to replace Caleb Johnson? And boy, like, I think Kamari would have been helpful yesterday. Caleb Johnson would have been huge if he'd come back for another year. And so the running game just isn't where it needs to be to support a passing game that's going to be inefficient like they were yesterday. Because I wrote in my story this morning about, a passing game reckoning. They leaned on the run game last week when Albany was shutting down the pass game. But neither of them were an option yesterday for them to really lean on. You mentioned that the running game got going late, but they still only averaged 3.4 yards per attempt. It was not a running game that they could really be like, yeah, we're going to hang our hat on this. And they were getting push up front. They were able to protect Granowski. So I think that they were winning for the most part in the trenches, but they weren't winning enough to get, 4 yards a pop and get downfield and really be able to lean into the run game. So I just think that this offense has shown that it's not necessarily going to be explosive anywhere at the moment.
Well, while you're, picturing bringing back players now in the NFL, I'll add that Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel were very missed out there for Iowa State last night. Guys, the three leading receivers were tight ends: Benjamin Bramer, Gabe Burkle, and Hanson, a running back, as the third leading receiver. That's so different from the script we saw in last year's game where Jalen Noel had the big play to score the touchdown, and then Higgins had the big play along the sideline. So those guys have been so missed. And so far, Iowa State's continuing to get it done. With those guys, Burkle had the big tipped catch reception that he said, hey, right place, right time. You got to have those moments to win CyHawk. And Benjamin Bramer had kind of the Randy Moss touchdown. You got mossed in the end zone. Iowa State loves going to those guys in the red zone. I asked Brady Quinn. He was one of the Fox Big Noon Kickoff guys. I asked him, Brady, is it possible to rely on tight ends the entire season, like Iowa State has kind of, proven itself to do? And he said, look, at some point you're going to need one of those wide receivers to step up. I thought Brett Eskildson had a couple good moments on Saturday. Dominic Overby, he had a drop. He had some things that make you think, man, with Higgins and Noel, that might have been a little bit different. We got to see Chase Sowell show up, the transfer portal. We've been calling for him on the show the last couple weeks, and Sowell made some nice things. But yeah, if we're bringing back NFL players, Ethan, I think those two would have helped the Cyclones yesterday.
Well, I think when you talk about, you mentioned Dom Overby, and I think he had two explosive plays that he probably could have come up with, and those would have changed the game significantly, and they would have given the Cyclones a much more comfortable victory. And so I guess I'm going to flip a question you already asked me back on you, and what do you feel like you've got three data points here, and you got three really solid performances from the Cyclones. What do you think this team is? Because you weren't necessarily the highest on them potentially getting back to the Big 12 championship going into the season. And now I'm sitting here thinking like, hey, we might have another team that's ready to make a run at a college football playoff spot, actually.
Yes, I think Iowa State's much more defensively sound than I thought they were going to be going into this season. The way they shut down the Iowa offense in the first half really showed me a lot. And they've stepped up in these big moments. My biggest gripe, as Cyclone fans might see it, with me picking them to win 7 games, wasn't the fact that I think Rocco Becht and Iowa State, are going to be bad. It was more of an observation of, hey, they went 5-1 in one-score games. Well, now they're 7-1 since last season in one-score games, with victories against Kansas State and Iowa State. The more I watch Rocco, Taylor Mauser, Matt Campbell, the play calls late with the pop pass to Gabe Burkle, those kinds of moments that Rocco Becht consistently hits on win Iowa State these close games. Cal Conradi wins you close games. Matt Campbell said it's A players in A moments are what it takes to win these one-score games. So now I'm kind of believing in the fact that maybe it's not just a fluke or an anomaly, that maybe there's something to Iowa State's recipe, the consistency, the coaching staff staying the same, that has allowed them to perform so well in these one-score games.
Yeah, and I think you look at somebody responded to me yesterday when I posted the final score and just threw up Granowski's final stat line, and I think I made another comment about Iowa State getting their first win in Jack Trice, but they responded to me on Threads and said, aw shucks, a lucky bounce, decides the game. And I don't love it when people say stuff like that because, one, Iowa had every opportunity to drive down the field and take a lead both in the first half and in the second half. I mean, how many times did both of these teams get the ball with a chance to go kind of seize control of the game? Iowa State dominated in the first quarter, forced 2 3-and-outs, and then Iowa had a 6-play drive that gained a total of -1 yard. So those first 3 drives were nothing burgers, and the Cyclones had only gotten 2 field goals out of their offense in the first quarter. And so Iowa got the ball multiple times in the second quarter with a shot at taking a lead, and I have to feel like that would have sucked the air out of Jack Trice. So, and then at that point, it's like, man, we dominated the first quarter, and we're still losing to these guys. But beside the point, winners make their own luck. Like teams that are good, are sound, execute, they're going to be the ones that get lucky because they're in the right place at the right time, like Gabe Burkle is, right? And so I hate it when people evoke luck. Yeah, obviously there's some bit of fortuitiveness that's going on out there, but the better teams are going to be the ones that seem to come up with every bounce. And I had somebody respond to me on X yesterday and say, "How come the Hawkeyes seem to get every bounce and every call? Why are they the luckiest team in college football?" And I think Hawkeye fans are thinking the Cyclones are the luckiest team in college football right now. But it's just simply over the last couple of years, the Hawkeyes have been winners, and that's why they seem to come up with every bounce. And now we're seeing that kind of shift over to Iowa State. It's not some fickle universe deciding, just this total random chance situation. It's these players going out and making the plays and executing that and making their own luck. That's why the Cyclones appear to be the luckier team now. It's because they're going out and doing what Iowa used to do.
Well, I'll throw some gas onto this fire. We asked Matt Campbell about Burkle's play in the catch afterward, and Matt Campbell said, that we needed the ball to bounce right because for this entire game, it wasn't bouncing right. And this is a quote. He said, for a couple minutes or for a little while, it felt like we were playing two different teams out there. And I think he was alluding to the teams in stripes, Ethan, as that, punt in the first half really changed that game. And there was another holding penalty on a drag route that I think Campbell wanted called and wasn't. So Campbell looked at that Burkle play as kind of evening out what he felt like, without explicitly saying it, was maybe a little 2-on-1 at times.
Yeah, as I like to say in pickleball, when my wife calls a ball out that's maybe a little questionable, and I thought might have hit the line, and then I ace her on my next opportunity, I like to say ball don't lie, and maybe that was a ball don't lie situation where all the Iowa fans are looking at it and say, "Man, what a lucky bounce!" and Iowa State's just saying, "Finally, something went our way." Because if you look at it, if Iowa pulls out the win on Saturday, Cyclone fans are going to be able to say the exact same thing. Say they capitalize on the muffed punt and score a touchdown there to win, and that ultimately is the touchdown that decides the difference in the game. Cyclone fans are going to say, "Man, a lucky bounce and a bad call, even on replay, a bad decision decides the game." And so, it's going to be you forget about all the lucky things that happen to your opponents, and or happen to you when you lose, and you only remember all the lucky and fortuitous stuff that happen to your opponents when you lose. But let's go ahead and tackle the big one here. You talked about it in your three burning questions. You should go read that for probably a more articulate and all the reasons why Ben might potentially think this. But are the Cyclones a better program than Iowa at this point?
I think in football they are, which is crazy to say for a lot of Cyclone fans, who are older than me and have seen the history and all this stuff. But and even the history under Matt Campbell, these two programs weren't necessarily even for the first 5 years. But Iowa State has won three out of the last four CyHawks now. Matt Campbell has his first winning streak in CyHawk. And the question I posed in my story, my column, you can read it on the Quad City Times, Waterloo, Sioux City, all of our newspapers, is if you were a neutral college football fan and you moved to the state of Iowa, who would you want to pick? I feel like there's one of the state programs with a head coach who is constantly courted by NFL and higher Power Five jobs. There's one team coming off of an 11-win season. There's one team that has a rock solid quarterback that everybody knows. I would say Rocco Beck's probably the most known quarterback in the state of Iowa right now. And then you have another team in Iowa that has all the history and all the historic success, but has a coach that's, maybe on the back nine of his career, maybe even on the back two or three of his career, without a rock solid quarterback option. And, a team that hasn't had one of those awesome years like Iowa State did last year, going to the Pop Tarts Bowl, going to the Big 12 championship. So I would just throw that out there as, hey, what's the kind of trendy team? What's the college football program right now with more energy that a neutral fan would want to go pick? And I argue right now that that team is the Iowa State Cyclones.
It's certainly, if you want to experience as much success as possible, it would appear to be the Cyclones. And I think you can also point out, I already mentioned three really tough games on the Hawkeyes schedule when I mentioned Indiana, Oregon, Penn State earlier. When I mentioned, yeah, sure, Mark can maybe still go 11-1, and with big wins over those three teams, you'd forget about a loss in the Cyclone game a little bit, but that's a tough schedule, right? And then on top of that, they play Nebraska, who just beat down Akron. Looks like they're improving in the third year of Matt Rule. And you get Minnesota, who's another rivalry game, and PJ Fleck is a hot coaching name seemingly every couple of years, and they looked really good this weekend. And so you're looking at a Big Ten schedule that every year is going to be a gauntlet, and you're looking at Iowa State's like that's clearly a better program. They just proved it on the field. They're potentially better across the board roster wise. I saw that debate on X all weekend, and of course, all the Cyclone fans thought that they were better at every position, and all the Iowa fans, thought they were better at every position except for maybe tight end this year and quarterback. Maybe they gave Rocco a bone there. But if you are that neutral fan that you have, kind of theorized about, you're looking at the Cyclones and saying this is a better team on the field, and they play in a conference where they might get less in the college football playoff, but it might be an easier path there.
Yeah, one note on, I guess, the Big 12 right now is with all we've talked about Iowa, I think that's still probably Iowa State's best win. Look at what K State has done since coming back from Ireland with two losses now on their total schedule. The only win coming against kind of a miracle against North Dakota. And South Dakota, Iowa State's FCS opponent from 2 weeks ago, ended up losing on Saturday. So um, I do think that Iowa Hawkeyes is still probably the best win. Maybe we talk about the data points. Maybe Iowa State doesn't quite have the strength of schedule that we thought it was going to be. They're 3-0, but really, how good are the three teams they've beaten?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that's been eaten at the back of my mind as well. I didn't listen to the sermon at church very well today because I was thinking about all this stuff. But you're looking at the Iowa State loss, and you're trying to rationalize it, you're trying to cope, and saying, well, at least the Cyclones are a top 25 team, right? And it's like, are they a top 25 team in the same way that Oregon is a top 25 team right now?
Yeah, I mean, Iowa State's the top ranked team in the Big 12. We saw Arizona State fall out of the top 25. And I really just think that this Big 12, it takes, 6, 7, 8 weeks before we really know what is what.
It'll be fun to follow along, and hopefully the Hawkeyes can pull things together, bounce back against UMass, and get things right before the Big Ten schedule kicks off. But the Cyclones appear like they're in the driver's seat in the Big 12, so it'll be a fun 2025 season. Thanks for watching here on our Sunday Rewind show. We'll be back on Wednesday with a preview of. Are the Cyclones on bye this week?
They're going to Jonesboro,
Oh,
Arkansas.
that's right, the big Arkansas State trip. So we'll be previewing the Red Wolves and the Minutemen this Wednesday. Thanks for watching.